Let me guess. Your home?
It was. And it was beautiful. Titan was like most planets.
Hello everybody. Today in this video I want to talk about the fall of the Sassanid Empire, why they collapsed, and why the Sassanid Empire ended. Now I want to preface this video by saying that it's going to be very long. I split the video into 3 different parts. I'm going to combine it all at the end, but it's going to be a very long video. It's going to sound like a boring history video, so if you guys are ready to get bored, brace yourselves. I got timestamps down below in the description. Number 2, we're only going to be talking about the Sassanid Empire's history, so everything else we're going to pretend like it doesn't even exist. And of that history, we're going to be only talking about things that relate to their downfall. So everything else, extremely brief. So now that we're done with prefaces, I can at least talk about the Sasanian Empire. First and foremost, do any of you guys know what the Sasanian Empire actually is? Well, the Sasanian Empire is one of many Iranian polities that dominated the Iranian plateau, and the Sassanians are interesting in that they're equals to the Byzantines in every single respect, almost taking them out multiple times, but yet they don't have as much spotlight shown on them. And in addition to this, a lot of the information on the Sassanians is pretty much wrong in a lot of instances, so I would like to do my diligence to give this amazing empire credit that it deserves. But with that being said, we can finally talk about the Sasanian Empire a minute in. So first and foremost, let's start with the history of us. Big Bang happens. Big Bang creates rocks. Rocks have water on them. The water has fish in them. The fish eventually get legs. Those fish go on land and they become human over time through evolution or through God. Continents move about and eventually they become the modern setup for our continents now. And that leads on to the creation of the Iranian plateau. Now humans that are now fully evolved get out of Africa and go, and some of them settle into the Iranian plateau, and they create the first Iranian kingdoms, villages, towns, hunter-gatherer civilizations. I'm actually starting backwards with that one, creating settled communities, and some of these first important kingdoms would be the Elamites and the Medians, and eventually afterwards the Persians from Persis, who would create the Achaemenidian Empire led by and created by Cyrus the Great, who would conquer huge swaths of territory. And after a couple of centuries, the empire would wax and wane in power, and after its zenith and its decline, Alexander the Great will knock on the door, barge in with 40,000 troops, and conquer the whole goddamn thing. And then afterwards, Alexander the Great will get syphilis, and then he'll die, and then his empire is split up between his 4 generals. The one that inherits most of the eastern and Iranian lands would eventually create the Seleucid Empire. And the Seleucid Empire exists for a couple of centuries, and then afterwards, during its decline, it will get conquered and swallowed up by the Parthian Empire, who would barge down the door with hundreds of thousands of horse archers. And it is with the creation of the Parthian Empire that we can finally stop. During the fall of the Parthian Empire that we see the creation of the Sassanid Empire. And here is where we can finally start our video talking about the fall of the Parthians. The Parthians will decline in a very interesting way. They'll be dealing with external invasions from both the Byzantines as well as various Turkic tribes, but in addition to this, they'll also face a lot of internal conflict. Ardogan V, after dealing with the Romans and also a Turkic invasion, would then be dealing with a lot of different rebellions in his empire. The worst of these being the rebellion of Waqalash, who would actually mint coins in his own name, challenging the authority of the Parthian king, and because of this a lot of his enemies would come to the support of Waqalash, so he was always having to deal with Waqalash having a sizable chunk of the Parthian Empire under his control. And because of this, Ardogan was completely oblivious to the growing power down south in the Parthian Empire. This coming power being of course the House of Sasan, which will later become the Sassanids, who we will then talk about. Now the origins of the House of Sasan are not really clearly understood, but in one narrative that seems to be popular, the Fire Temple priest Pabbag was essentially the ruler of the House of Sasan family. Now, Zoroastrianism was a very popular religion among many Parthians in the Parthian Empire, and in addition to this, the Zoroastrian clergy was also powerful, so Pabag in of himself was a very powerful man. This is augmented by the fact that Pabag was able to secure territory that actually housed Akhmedidian ruins, and this makes sense because he was based around Ishtakir in the province of Fars, which also houses Persepolis. And with these ruins, he was able to craft a narrative in which his family were actually direct descendants related to that of the Akhmedidians, giving him a sort of story that he could base a lot of his authority, his justifications for rulership. This would also importantly coincide with him allegedly assassinating the governor of Ishtakir and claiming Ishtakir for his own territory. And by claiming the city, he was able to also push out of Ishtakir throughout the entire province of Fars, securing it, so that by the time Ardashir, his son, when he was able to inherit the throne, he would already have the province of Fars under his control. With Ardawan distracted, well, the gate was all clear for Ardashir. With Ardashir I now at the helm of the House of Sasan family, the Sassanids would push out of Fars and conquer adjacent territories around him, and when Ardawan finally figured this out, he would then send army after army to try and stop the Sassanids, but they would be defeated, and Ardawan V would have to go and fight the Sassanids with himself and his own army. Now, at the Battle of Hormozgan, the two monarchs would be facing off against each other. Ardawan would have a much larger army but less well-equipped forces, and Ardashir would have 10,000 cav but would have flexible chain armor akin to that of the Romans. And also Ardashir would arrive to the battle earlier and take a more advantageous position, so he was tactically and also militarily superior to that of his enemy, who was numerically superior. At the battle itself, Ardawan would be killed, and Ardashir following the battle will then deal with Wakalash, kill him, and then push throughout all of the Parthian Empire, capturing as much territory as he could, primarily focusing on the Iranian plateau. Now, he would incorporate the Parthian nobility in a confederacy of sorts, where the contract would be that the king would leave the Parthian lands alone in exchange for Parthian nobility to provide armies, wealth, and generals. Now, the Sassanids would be able to consolidate control over the various Parthian families by marrying into them, and the Parthian families would also do this with the Sassanids in order to improve their own family's standing. In addition, if a Parthian nobleman ever got too frisky with the Sassanids, then the Sassanids could task a different Parthian family to engage that rebelling Parthian family and axe him off completely. And they did this numerous of times to try and stop the Parthian families from gaining too much power, pitting Parthian family against Parthian family. This manipulation was needed as during this time, as well as for a large chunk of the Sassanid Empire, most lands and most manpower would be owned by the Parthians. Now, there were historically 7 Parthian families, who we will discuss later. Some of them are not as important to the narrative, so I'll bring up the appropriate family when needed, but just know that it was very rare for these Parthian families to see eye to eye. In most part, they were divided either through religious disputes, trade lines, claims to lands, regional rivalries, or killings between each other that create future conflict. And the Parthian families only saw the Sassanids themselves as the true heirs to the throne, so the Parthian rebellion for the throne was very rare and until the events that we will talk about later down the line. Now, the Sassanids and the Parthians would ebb and flow in power during this period, from the foundation of the empire to the events of the video that we're going to talk about later down the line. However, the Sassanids were able to always maintain control of the throne. They would never ever have complete control of the empire, as evidenced by the Confederacy, but it was more of a decentralized state anyway, with greater autonomy given to the Parthians as opposed to how it was treated conventionally, with the Sassanid king having complete control over the empire. But during the reign of Balash, actually, things would start to change for the worse in 484. Now, Balash would inherit the throne from his bro Peyruz, who would die at the hands of the Hephalites, and he would actually be ruled over by Sukhra, who was installed previously by Peyruz as minister of the empire. Now, upon Peyruz being killed, Sukhra would go to the Hephalites, defeat their armies, and kill the Hephalite king. And Sukhra, after about 4 years, was able to install Quibad as ruler. The Parthian families were never able to contest the throne, but they did exert influence on the Sassanid kingship. And they were able to depose the Sassanid king in favor of picking a different person from the house of Sasan. And we'll see more of this later. So, effectively, by being able to install Khubad, he was the true leader of the Sassanid Empire, as nobility and individuals would go through Sukhra instead of Khubad. The amount of power that Sukhra had was massive, and a lot of this was due to the fact that he was able to gain a lot of prestige and respect from victories that he gained over the Hephalites, a really huge problem that Khubad would have. And essentially what he would do is, after about 5 years of Sukhra's massive power that he had over Khubad would exile Sukhra to Sistan, his own homeland. But once there, things would continue, as Sukhra would still have massive power. People would give him tribute instead of the king, from nobility to the Sassanids themselves, like different family members. He would tell people that he installed a king, and combined with the already existing prestige that he had, it led to many of the great Parthian families giving support to Sukhra instead of the king. These Parthian families being the lifeline of the Sassanid Empire. So he couldn't do really anything about the situation, and if Khubad wanted to fight Sukhra directly, then Sukhra would just destroy him in battle, or send in one of the many supporters, until he met Shapur Razi, the Mihran leader of the Mihran family. Now Shapur was able to gather up a coalition of Sukhra's rivals and enemies, as well as rivals from Sukhra's own Karen family. And this illustrates what we will see later of the Sassanid kings being used in these dynastic wars between different Parthian families, with this being the Mihran fighting the Karens, and Shapur with his allies will later engage Sukhra, being able to capture him and then execute him, ending the Karen hold on the empire. Even with Sukhra defeated, the Karens still had a lot of sway in the Sassanid Empire, and the Mihrans were now coming in to fill the void that Sukhra left behind. So because of this, Khubad was never able to quote-unquote have full control over the Sassanid Empire until something known as the Mazdakite Rebellion. Now we get on to the Mazdakite Rebellion, and the Mazdakitism was a religion very popular among lower classes of people, as it preached an end to the rigid class structure of the Sassanid Empire. The empire was classically understood as being divided between the king, nobility, clergy, and the lay people, and Mazdakitism, you guessed it, was very popular among the lay people. Now Khubad would use the growing religion in his own ends, in order to lay out some reforms to curb Parthian power, by supporting a popular uprising. One thing to realize is that one of the tenets of Mazdakitism is the communal sharing of women, and due to lackluster forms of contraceptives at the time, there would be a lot of babies, and because of the lack of respect for the class structure between different classes, all four groups would be banging each other. And more importantly to our discussion, the different Parthian families would also engage in this, with families getting down and dirty with even their regional rival. But this had a side effect, and this was that the children that were born through these Parthian families getting together would be able to claim different dynastic lands, and by being able to trace their lineage to different families, they would use these claims to grab territory from their rivals, causing some families to grow in size and power, while others were completely destroyed. Keep in mind, the big families that were more powerful did not get wiped out. The rebellion itself didn't have any long-lasting changes besides weakening the Parthian families, but during this chaos, one important reform Khubad would pass would be cadastral surveys, so that the monarchy could check how many tillers each Parthian family controlled, creating accountability for the amount of wealth a Parthian family was supposed to provide, a problem that we will see much later on during Khusrow's reign. Now, Khusrow is classically known as a great centralizing king, and he would attempt to do some centralizing and rein in the Parthians more than anyone else, so big problem. First reform he would introduce would be to check the manpower of the Parthians, much like the tillers in the cadastral surveys. Now, this was due to the Parthian families not giving out correct forces of the manpower the Parthians would send, sometimes giving 100 horses instead of 1,000, sometimes sending in archers without bows, or paying swordsmen the same as cavalry members, or sending peasants instead of trained soldiers, or sending horses with no mounts, and this would lead to, well, a need, right, for some oversight. So he would send out attendants to do this work of oversighting the Parthians, and remember, the Parthians were given autonomy and had access to wealthy silk trade and just had to give the required forces, so they were cheaping out the Sassanids big time. Now, this is overall a lot more oversights than the Parthians were used to, but the system did work initially, and the issue was that the system was prone to corruption and abuse, with the attendants taking too much manpower or too much wealth, and from the Parthians. And also, the Parthians would sometimes make separate deals with the inspectors, allowing them to continue their operations, leaving them alone, give the attendants a piece of the pie, and these problems were never addressed by Khusrow. Now, the second reform would follow the same way. Khusrow will divide the empire into 4 parts, and task a Iran spa bed, with leading the military forces there. Do keep in mind too that the partition of the army into 4 groups was also an idea of Kaveh as well in one of his reforms. So this is just his son continuing the reforms of his dad. An attempt to weaken the traditional Parthian armies and defend the large Sassanid Empire, but it didn't do anything, as Parthian families would still be appointed in these positions and would sometimes still rule their homeland to the ire of their regional rivals, and some would rule lands they had no business in at all, with those families losing the lands that they once coveted being at the mercy of a different family. And it drastically increased the factionalism of the empire, with different armies putting all their forces alongside these Iran spot-bed armies. And you know, these ever-increasing reforms would make certain Parthian families, particularly in North and Northeast, lose faith in the Sassanids, as the whole basis of the Confederacy were the Parthians were being left alone, and Khusrow's attempt at turning the decentralized state into a centralized state was leading to the empire's demise. Now, the last change Khusrow would make would be making a standing army loyal to the monarchy, made up of leftover children from the Mazdakite Rebellion and from all the nuclear acquired manpower, but this army sucked, as it had no support from the Parthian families, terrible at fighting Turks and nomadic people, armies that the Parthian families were way more experienced at fighting. Overall, Khusrow made only halfway changes that ended up pissing off the Parthians more than changing things for the better, but with the reign of his son, things would get much worse. Now we get on to Hormozd IV. Now, if Khusrow was the one to lay out the dumpster, then Hormozd would be the one to set on fire. Continuing his dad's reforms, he would cut the pay of the Parthian family members serving in the army and reduce the cavalry that the Parthians could control. But the worst thing that he would do would be to start executing and murdering different Parthian nobles in a way to get rid of the Parthians' control over the monarch, and he would apparently kill 13,600 members of different families. But he didn't completely wipe them out, as he still needed their support, like Vinduyi or Vistam, who we will talk about later. One way he would kill off these members is by classically having dynastic battles, so you'd have like different families battling each other for supremacy because of the orders of the king. And now this would all come to a head when we get to Bahram Chubin, a Parthian dynast, who was tasked with killing off many Parthian family members until, after being constantly pressured by Hormozd, revolted against him. Now, Bahram would control the northern spot-bed army inherited from his grandfather, and he would actually be instrumental in helping Khusrow I against the Byzantines, as well as in Hormozd IV, helping out against the Hephalites, earning him a lot of prestige and a lot of respect. In fact, against the Hephalites, he would cross the Oxus River, destroy the Hephalite armies, and kill the king. And this augmented his prestige to legendary status. So Hormozd would, after this point, start harassing Chubin. And because Hormozd feared Chubin's growing power, he wanted to axe it. But Bahram, upon hearing this, rebelled. Now, there's a common legend in which Bahram Chubin rebelled because Hormozd IV sent him a dress, and this was meant to be an insult on his masculinity because Bahram Chubin lost against the Byzantines. Usually, a ruler would insult someone or defame them or smear their reputation following a loss, and Bahram Chubin lost big time against the Byzantines. But you know what? I mean, the Sassanid dress is embedded with all these types of silks and beautiful colors. I mean, I think it could be looked at as like a really rich gift. But either way, Bahram Chubin either rebelled because of his emasculinity or because Hormozd IV wanted to axe him. He would actually have a lot of support from the Parthian families in North and Eastern Iran-Shah, as they grew tired of the Sassanids centralizing and murdering policies. His own court would actually delay Hormozd into doing anything, and this was due to the court's plan to get rid of Hormozd IV in a coup led by Vistam and Vinduyi, 2 Parthian dynasts who wanted to avenge the killing of their dad Asparapet at the hands of Hormozd. Now, Hormozd would talk to his son Khusrow in what to do, but Khusrow would not want to do anything, as besides the support that they got from the double V's, they had no one else to rely on against Bahram's rebellion. Now, because of this position and Bahram minting coins in Khusrow's name, this would make Hormozd paranoid of his son wanting the throne. Now, Bahram did this because, again, the Parthians did not see themselves as rulers of the empire, even though, because of the Mazdakite Rebellion, some Parthian dynasts could trace their lineage to the Sassanids. So, in fear of his safety, Vistam fled the Sassanid Empire to the Byzantine Empire with Khusrow, while Hormozd captured Vinduyi. Afterwards, with the help of Vistam's forces and Armenian nobility, they were able to stop Bahram's rebellion, and then afterwards, they deposed, blinded, and killed Hormozd IV, starting Khusrow II's reign. How blinding was done would be they would take a hot poker, stick it in someone's eyeball, and then it would pop. Or they would just like take the poker and just rip out the eyeball like that. Either way, they blinded and gouged out Hormozd IV's eyeballs, and then he was killed. Once Khusrow was on the throne, he was again at the mercy of Parthian dynasts Vinduyi and Vistam, reminded by both of them that he's only on the throne because of them. True in many ways, but it pushed Khusrow to kill the two uncles. We could get into more murder. We should talk a little bit about the effects of Bahram Chubin's revolt. It pushed a distinct Parthian identity among the Parthian families that sided with Bahram Chubin. This was called Pahlav and was heavily concentrated in north and northeast Parthian homelands, where their whole ideology revolving around a lessened role of the monarch and more Parthian-friendly changes such as moving the capital to Ray, Parthian homeland in the north. Now Khusrow II's reign will start around 590, and soon after making Vinduyi as minister and making Vistam spa bed of the east, he would attempt to get rid of both of them. Now, he succeeded in killing Vinduyi, but Vistam would actually rebel at an opportune time, attracting many of the previous rebelling Bahram Chubin's army. In addition, more Parthian dynasts would give support to Vistam as a result of frustration against the Sassanid monarch's policies, and as a result, the northern and northeastern portions of the empire would cede off and become independent for 7 years. Now, Khusrow will use an Armenian nobleman by the name of Sambat Bagrutani to stop Vistam's rebellion. He briefly served with the Byzantines, but after a failed rebellion, he was banished and ended up at the Sassanid court at around 606 or 607 CE. After Khusrow and Vistam had a battle that ended in a draw, Sambat would later engage Vistam with Armenian nobles loyal to him. In this battle, he would end up killing Vistam, but actually, because of the amount of support that he had with the Parthian noblemen, the rebellion actually continued, and Sambat would have to continue putting down remnants of this rebellion. Now, this concludes the first part of this 3-part series. I've wanted to do just one video, but I felt like it would be way too long, so I decided to cut it down into 3 parts. So this is the first part, the Parthian drama with the Sassanids. The second part will be the last great war of antiquity. Then the next part after that will be the Islamic conquest. So I'm going to do it down by that. And then afterwards, when I'm done with these 3 videos, I will combine them into one video. So that's easier for you guys to watch. Stay tuned because the second part should be out soon.